should be able to start seeing that screen.
Yes. It says it's counting down. 4 minutes, 44 seconds, 43, 42. So it's counting.
I'd be surprised if there are those.
And it's not.
But I mean, there may be.
When were we
So
appointed?
there it is. It's showing bars.
Feb-
Yeah, it's up
February
now.
1, I believe.
February 1?
That's when I got my phone call. Does that count? I think that's what I put on my paper.
Dr. Facer, when were we appointed? So I fill out this.
February 2nd.
You're wrong.
I put the first.
Oh, February 1st, that works too. I guess February 1st, didn't it?
That's when I got the phone call.
Yeah, so February 1st. Unless you're like me and you wrote second. Which will get corrected because it was the first.
Oh. Is this everyone? Can Jacob come back and Jacob's name?
Yes.
Oh, was he good?
Thank you, Jacob. Yes, we have, I believe, everybody.
I went to the wrong building. I went to 45 rows. I realized I should have looked at the exact address that. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Oh, did you?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, your mom was built watching her dad was following behind.
That sounds about right. Or, yeah, so, so then, so.
That's huge.
Yeah.
All right. I would like to welcome you to our, let's get our recording devices done. We are live streaming this on YouTube. So just let me give the commission a brief update. As you may recall, we had some technology issues last time. I spent some time with the Department of Technology Services here at the state and then with Provo City. So what we're doing is we have a Zoom meeting that is being live streamed. So the only people that are on the Zoom meeting are actually our folks, our volunteers and our intern, as well as Jeff will be making a presentation so that when he makes his presentation, the participants can see the slides that are shared. And so that gives us one layer of removal from our Zoom stream, which we're going to hope that the technical experts that we consulted keep us safe. So again, thank you for your patience with our last meeting, and I deeply apologize for the experience that you had. We're delighted. I want to remind all of us, make sure I've got mine silenced. And Commissioner Durham tells me if I put it on do not disturb, it won't ring through to my computer. So well, hopefully that'll be successful. We're delighted to have a new commissioner with us, Commissioner Karen Hale. Commissioner Hale, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to briefly introduce yourself to your fellow commissioner.
Well, thank you very much. I am very pleased to see some familiar faces here, and I look forward to working with all of you. Just a little background. I worked in publishing and editing, and then served for over 20 years in local and state government. And I served for 8 years, 2 terms in the Utah State Senate, where I had the wonderful privilege of working with Senator Hilliard, learning a lot from him, working alongside him. And I believe Senator Hilliard was part of 4 redistricting cycles.
I never remember the committee, but I
And I was a part of one, just following the 2000 census. After my time in the Senate, I went to work in the administration of Salt Lake City Mayor Ralph Becker, and I worked there as communications director and director of community relations. And after that, I went to Salt Lake County and into county government, where I served deputy mayor. I served as deputy mayor of community and external affairs for Mayor Ben McAdams. And then after that, served as special initiatives director for Mayor Jen Wilson. So I left the county last year to pursue other avocations, some of which may include grandchildren. And I really look forward to working with all of you on this commission. And I know our task is great. And I know I have big shoes to fill with the void left by Senator Jones, our esteemed colleague. And I know that as we go forward with this task, but I know I share your desire to serve with integrity and to ensure that we have a transparent, inclusive process. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say hello, and thank you for the warm welcome.
Well, thank you. We're again delighted to have you, and as well as all of the other members of the commission.
I'd like to add one other thing. She had the honor of running for lieutenant governor in the state, and so as such, she got to tour the state. I think got to know many of the state area as well. So she's just not from Salt Lake. She has a statewide perspective.
Thank you.
Well, we look forward to you sharing that with us. I do want to introduce one other person that is a fresh face. We have Jacob Aqua. Jacob is our first intern. We will likely have many others. Jacob has finished his first year in his Master's of Public Administration program at BYU. He was an undergraduate statistics major, did an internship in the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And so Jacob has a wealth of experience, and especially his technical skills will be quite helpful to us. And so we're looking forward to having his assistance. And then again, we have volunteers, my daughter Moira and my wife Teresa, who are helping monitor the live stream and the Zoom to make sure that we don't have any unexpected issues.
Or visitors.
Or visitors. So I did want to note a couple of other things in the welcome. You may have seen that the Census Bureau released yesterday data on apportionment, and unfortunately, Utah did not gain a seat, which was not unexpected. But it leaves us with 4 seats, and so we will only get to draw 4 districts instead of a 5th. But the census data has now been estimated that what they call the legacy data will be available mid-August. But there are some challenges in using that data, but it's possible that as soon as mid-August, we may be able to start drawing some maps.
And
that they used in previous censuses instead of the format that they've promised to release it in.
okay,
And that's about.
but it's still the same numbers.
It's still the same numbers, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is our oath of office. We have a terrific young notary that's going to help us in this process, assisted by, well, I should welcome our counsel. Again, we have Brian Alder, who is here as our staff counsel until we finalize hiring our permanent counsel, which we'll talk about.
So is Brian the one who walked us through the Zoom last time?
Brian is the one who walked us through the Zoom last time.
And we're all smiling at you, just.
So,
Sorry. So I guess I'll just do the oath of office for everybody, starting with that. I'm assuming I have to do that all individually.
It's up to you.
we can do it as everybody at
You
once.
can do it everyone at once, have them stand up and say their names and take the oath of office, and then you can sign them individually.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess repeat after me.
Stand up.
Sorry, I feel so bad. I've never done it before.
Most of us have.
Okay. So I, and your name,
I,
Still face to the second.
do solemnly swear or affirm
Do
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the
the
Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Utah,
and
and the Constitution of the State of Utah,
and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
Perfect. And I think you guys all have a copy of the oath. So I guess if you want to just pass them down, I can go ahead and sign them. And Brian, you said these do not need to be notarized?
No, but if you have your notary, you can notarize that. That doesn't hurt.
Okay, the second document that we have is the disclosure statement. And some of you may have noticed that it was slightly complex. And so I'm going to ask Brian if he wouldn't mind walking us through any questions that we have. So for example, I'll start with one of the questions I had. It asks us where we reside. Does that want our specific address or our city?
Whatever you feel comfortable. You can put your specific address, and this is a public document. Once it's filled out, it will be filed with my office, the general office, but also with you. It doesn't have to be filled out today. I think we just wanted to make sure that you got a copy of it. I can go through kind of specifically sort of some of the sections here. They have to do with if you have a substantial interest, for instance, you mind if I just walk through it?
Yes, please.
So this disclosure statement is pursuant to the Utah Public Officers and Employees Ethics Act. If you do have conflicts, you're required to disclose them.
Wait a second, before you get,
Yes.
why don't you go through this sucker? So what's the answer to your question on where I reside?
So we can just put the state
You
or the
can-
city.
You can put the city, that's okay. You
Okay.
don't need your personal address.
I've got my personal address already written in.
We'll give you another copy unless you're okay with that. So.
And what's the official name of this thing?
The Utah Independent Redistricting Commission.
And you said it's on February.
February 1st. For everyone except Karen. And I don't remember the date, so hopefully Karen remembers.
I will find it.
In 2 weeks is good enough for government work.
I think we're set.
Thank you. And so the next question or possible disclosure item is if you are an officer, director, agent, employee, or owner of a substantial interest in a business entity that is subject to regulation by this commission, provide the Department of or possibly Finance, then this is where you make that disclosure.
And if we're
If
not,
that applies,
should we leave it blank?
you can leave it blank. That's
I put
correct.
in not applicable or
You can put
MA.
not applicable,
Okay.
that's great too. The next question, if you have solicited, received, or have agreed to receive for yourself or another compensation, loans, gifts, directly or indirectly from a person or business who now may be subject to, and it says 67-16-5, which says, receiving a loan. If you knowingly receive a gift or substantial value that would tend to improperly influence a reasonable person in your position to depart from the faithful and impartial discharge, or that a public officer or public employee would know, or that a reasonable person in that position should know that it's for the purpose of rewarding you, or if you are now or in the near future involved in a governmental action directly affecting the donor or lender of a gift. Again, this may or may not apply, but if it does, you can fill this out. And again, you don't have to fill it out right now. It can be filled out at home and you can turn it back in. But this is a good time to sort of go through it. It might be helpful. And then it has a place for you to fill out what that brief description of the loan, gift, and compensation is. And then lastly, if you participated in or received or agreed to receive or anticipate to receive compensation in respect to a transaction between state agencies and a business entity of which you have a substantial interest, being 10%, at least 10% of that business, and then it would be a disclosure here. And if that applies, then feel free to fill out and sign and then turn back in to Chair Pacer.
And if you have completed it, and then we can pass it down to the notary as well.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have provided dinner for the notary as well, so she's earning her keep tonight.
Thank you for that.
No wonder she's doing it so slowly.
The third document that you have is the statute asked us to certify that we are in compliance with the issues laid out. And I will just go ahead and read them just for transparency's sake. I further certify that during my service on the commission, I will not be a lobbyist or principal, as those terms are defined in Utah code, be a candidate for or holder of any elective office, including federal elective office, state elective office, or local government elective office, be a candidate for or a holder of any office of a political party except for delegate to a political party's convention, be an employee of or a paid consultant for a political party committee, personal campaign committee, or any political action committee affiliated with a political party or controlled by an elected official or candidate for elective office, including any local government office. Serve in public office if the member is appointed to the public office by the governor or the legislature. Be employed by the United States Congress or the Utah State Legislature, or hold any position that reports directly to an elected official, including a local elected official, or to any person appointed by the governor or legislature to any other public office. And if you can sign that, and then if you will pass that one to me, that one does not have to be notarized, but I am charged to deliver them to the governor's office. Thank you very much. All right. Any questions on anything we've covered so far? Okay, the next item we have on the agenda. Copy of the minutes before our meeting. Does anybody have any corrections or anything that they'd like to add to the minutes? Not hearing any.
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Not hearing any. The motion carries. That the minutes of the April 13th meeting are approved. And they will be posted on the public meetings website for public inspection. The next issue that we have is the electronic meeting policy. And again, I'm going to ask some guidance from council to help us on this. As I understand it, in order for us to have remote participation by any member of the commission, we need to adopt an electronic meetings policy. Now that may mean, well, let's go through it and then we can talk about some of the implications. Yes.
So the Open and Public Meetings Act requires a policy by a public body, which you are, in order to have electronic meetings. This is sets forth guidance for that. This is pursuant to Utah Code Section 52-4-207. And this sets forth what is required under the act. I think you can read through it. It outlines sort of the procedures when commission members are appearing telephonically or electronically, and goes through the fact that notice is still required. Requirements under the Open and Public Meetings Act still go forward. You can have this anchor location and also via Zoom as you're doing. Also sets forth the anchor location is this location in this room. And then also pursuant to the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act, you may convene or conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents substantial risk to the health and safety of those present. And then he or she follows through those requirements. So it's required under the act. It's a policy, again, for you to discuss and possibly approve.
I was unclear from reading that whether there's a requirement that if I'm going to attend a meeting electronically, I need to give advance notice, or can I simply appear and participate?
Yes, typically you would give notice to the chair.
To the
that's
chair.
going to take place. Let's see.
How soon before the meeting?
Says notice of possibility. So usually it's the chair that gives notice of the electronic meeting at least 24 hours before the meeting. But again, it's up to you. You can have the option, and as long as you give notice to the chair, then the electronic meeting needs to be noticed pursuant to the public Utah Open and Public Meetings Act at least 24 hours in advance. And if something comes up and you have to call in, then that can be done pursuant to OPMA and also
Without triggering that 24-hour
Yes,
notice. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
So discussion items, discussion issues around the policy.
I like the idea of being able to attend electronically. I think it's always good to be in person, but if I can't be in person, I certainly want to participate and make sure I'm not missing something.
Other comments?
The example would be if you were ill,
Yeah.
rather than come and expose people.
I know, if, for example, there will be a point in June where I would like to attend electronically. My daughter is moving across the country and we'd like to help her move. But I'd still like to be able to participate. And so having this provision would allow that to happen. Any further discussion? Is there a motion to adopt the policy?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the search committee report and recommendations concerning an executive director. Last week, the search committee, which consisted of Commissioner Hilliard and Commissioner Durham, and I met with 4 different candidates, as we had indicated to the commission that we would do. After meeting with the candidates, we reached a unanimous decision that we would like to recommend to the commission the Gordon Haight as our executive director. Gordon is currently an assistant city manager in the city of Harriman. Are there any comments from either of the search committee members?
I just have one question.
Yes.
He's apparently working full-time. They were saying come to work for us full-time
Yes.
for that, just the short duration that we're in existence.
Yes. And we discussed that with him, and he was clear on that and understood that this is a short term, but he saw it as an opportunity to do something of importance. So, anything else from either of the committee members? So it's the recommendation then of the search committee that we formally proceed with offering employment to Gordon Haight as our executive director. Is there a motion? So moved.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, motion carries. I then, upon hearing your declaration, we'll go ahead and proceed with engaging Mr. Haight in discussion, and hopefully we can get that finalized very, very quickly.
Take some of the burden off of you.
And it will be nice to have some additional support. So thank you. Let me give you a couple of updates on the RFP process. As you know, we have an RFP out for general counsel. In the meantime, we do have the Attorney General's office and Brian Alder, who has been assigned to us to serve as temporary counsel until we get our counsel. Those RFPs will close on the 4th of May. And so after the 4th, we will need to convene a committee to review the applications. We've had over 400 people review the RFPs, but not that many have applied, not surprisingly. So right now we've had about 7 firms that indicate an intent to submit a proposal, although those numbers could increase between now and the 4th. If any of you are aware of firms that could serve as potential general counsel or as voting rights specialists, feel free to let me know, and we can make sure that if they haven't seen the RFP, that it can get to them. Does anybody have any questions? Senator?
Thank you. One of the questions I had is to me, it's going to be pretty obvious that one attorney is not going to be able to handle it. And the question is, you talk about firms, whether there's a firm that would step in and make some attorneys available, maybe one full-time and others on a call basis. And the second question is, will they be required to meet our same requirements that they cannot be politically, all that kind of thing? I think we may have a real challenge in trying to find an attorney unless they're willing, like a firm is willing to say, we'll make 3 of our partners available, and we think we have the expertise to do that.
Yeah, and we did put in the RFP some expectations around compliance with the general provisions of the statute, as well as that we asked them for disclosure of any partisan political activity that they've engaged in the last 10 years, so that we can be aware as we're making that decision.
I think a question you get asked is, I'm sure most law firms have paid lobbyists, part of the firm. And so you may get 3 attorneys who in that firm have never done that. But when you look at their partners of 50 attorneys, there may be 5 or 6 in that firm who have. And I think we need at least be some consistency in how we look at that.
And I RFPs.
And one way that we might end up handling that is for the firm to do a typical kind of conflicts check and possibly consider screening, which works, but that'll be something we'll have to consider. That's where they wall off the lawyers who have the conflicts with anything to do with the project. So.
And again, I'm going to rely on the expertise of some of you that have far more experience with the law in helping us review those proposals.
See, what advantage of Justice Durham and Judge Thorne? They're never wrong.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Ever since.
She used to let me know when I was wrong.
Well, thank you. Any further questions on the?
Do you want the committee to be established now so it's ready to go when you meet that deadline?
I think that would actually, that's a fantastic suggestion.
I would suggest these two, since they have experience and they know about firms and walling people off and so forth.
And they
And
were
the
our
one
search,
from each party.
they were our search committee on the other.
Is that a qualification or a disqualification? I don't know.
Might be well to use Robin. Yeah.
Spread the wealth around.
No, but you got 3 attorneys over there. I might suggest maybe you want to expand it and have Judge Thorne also as part of that group, that subcommittee to do it. I think you've got 3 good qualified attorneys that understand what they're dealing with and how they need to deal with. I suggest you have all 3 of those assisted.
That'll teach me to volunteer
Mhm.
somebody
There you
else.
I should have learned
Karma.
that a long time ago. That means you haven't been to a caucus lately, have you?
All right. We will proceed with the 3 of you then as our review panel. And as soon as we get those closures, we'll get in touch with you and facilitate getting those reviews. Wanted to give you an update on our website development. We have the state office, I guess they're part of Department of Technology Services.
Okay. I see under the general legal counsel, there's also voting rights
Yes.
at council. Is that separate or is that
They're separate.
combined?
So we
Okay.
have 2 RFPs, one for general counsel and one for the Voting Rights Act counsel,
with the same deadlines?
with the same deadlines.
Okay.
In part because the Voting Rights Act is so specialized, our assumption is that we would need to have somebody that had clear experience in that space. So just a quick update on the website design. I met again yesterday with the designers. We have some preliminary mock-ups of the pages. It conforms to the kinds of information that we had discussed earlier with information about the commission, our timeline, eventually having maps. Now that raises the issue of mapping software. One of the things that we are planning to do is, as part of the website, have the opportunity for individuals to draw their own maps. Some of that may be for the communities of interest. Some of it may be for the other legislative districts, et cetera. We are waiting on the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel to finalize a contract. They have 2 vendors that will each provide a different element of the software. One is Esri. Esri will do the public facing mapping software. And the other, all of a sudden, my blank, I'm going to apologize. The other is, I believe, well, I'm not going to misspeak. So I will send that out to you. We're waiting for them to finalize the contract. As soon as they finalize the contract, we can then move forward with the acquisition of the software for the commission, and then figure out what we need in terms of staffing support to be able to operate that software in as efficient a way as possible, given the constraints that we're going to have. So the goal on the website is to have it up and running in the next couple of weeks. Now, there may be some pieces that will be still delayed, like the software, pieces, we seek to integrate that. But we want as soon as possible. Now, we do have a new email address for people that would like to submit comments to the commission to help facilitate our comments. Also, just as a note, we have turned off the ability to comment on our live stream so that we don't have any of the problems that we had in our last meeting. But if people want to submit comments, they can submit them to UIRC comments@utah.gov. Again, that's UIRC comments@utah.gov. And we will be tweeting that out, and we will have a page that will put that up on the live stream here. We have that we can put up now, just for a moment.
I have put that email up already too.
Okay.
Someone asked about it,
And-
so it's in the chat.
Okay, so the chat is in there is a chat function that's separate from the comment function on the YouTube live stream. And so we put that into the chat in the live stream. So that we're trying to get the word out that people can communicate with us. We want their comments. We just want it in a forum that is appropriate for understanding and ability to document it as well. Okay, any questions about the website? Not hearing any. Commissioner Baker asked, so is many of you remember, Commissioner Baker has experience with geographic information system, and as part of that experience in his work at Davis County, he has some particularly relevant experience in the drawing of precincts, among other things, as in his work at Davis County. And he asked if he could share a presentation with us. And so we're going to ask him to go ahead and do that. So if you'll go ahead and share your screen, that should, it will be available on the live stream, and then it will be on these monitors here behind us.
Commissioner Fisher, I just had a question. So I understand Commissioner Baker, it really brings an expertise that none of the rest of us think have in this area. I think it would be important for him to look at this computer program things that we're talking about.
Yes.
So that he feels comfortable with it, because I think we may turn to him and say, what does all this mean?
Yeah, most especially if there's some element that's missing, or that would be really helpful that you could then go back through the state to the vendor and say, will you add this piece or that piece?
Yes, and
Sure, happy to do that, no problem.
yeah, and we've had some preliminary conversations with some of the states, GIS folks to make sure we understand what they have capacity for. But we will definitely rely on his expertise for that. That's a terrific point.
My other question, will we be using the same information or supplier, I'll use it, provider, as the state is using for their reapportionment committee?
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that. I think as long as they're just giving information we want, right?
Yeah, so that is up to us. And when we see the proposal and the accepted price, for example, we will then make that final determination. But the likelihood is that we will be using the same software. Now, some of that I think can be quite advantageous, especially if a citizen wants to share a map on the legislature's side. They'll have the same software to share on our side as well.
To comment on that, my concern would be using the same data that the legislative committee will be using, so that we're consistent in using the same background data, base data, as we call it.
Good.
Different software packages. Myself, I'm not too worried about it.
That's why you're getting paid big bucks.
I'm well paid here, yes. Thank you for allowing me to share this. I know our meetings have been administrative up till now, and this is going to be our first delve at all into anything related to mapping. 10 years ago, there was the state carried out the redistricting. And when that was done, the data was handed over to the counties, and there were subsequent issues. So I'm going to jump through here. This presentation is about 40 minutes long, but I've been directed to shoehorn it down to about 25. So there's going to be times when I speed up through this presentation and other times when I slow down to hopefully clarify.
If I, hold that against your time
Sure.
recommendation,
Okay,
especially since some of us may have some questions that we'd like to have some technical guidance on.
Especially since we're starting from zero.
Exactly.
okay. Number one, I am an employee of Davis County, but as I share this, I want to make clear that I am not representing Davis County in any official capacity. Also, I do share this presentation with the permission of the county. And I want to say thanks to the administration for allowing us to view this. To share some background, as I mentioned, 10 years ago, the redistricting was completed in Utah. When redistricting was done, the 29 counties in Utah received the new boundaries that had just been drawn, and they immediately went to work on re-precincting. So at Davis County, the elections and GIS staff and the GIS staff, I was included in that. We quickly began to see irregularities in the new boundaries. The new boundaries were forcing the creation of many zero voter and low voter precincts.
Okay, help me understand, zero voter and low voter
A voting precinct covering a geographic area
that had no people in it.
that had 0 people in it,
Okay,
and also other precincts that had very low voters,
okay.
low number of voters. Also, these new boundaries, in a few cases, crossed over private residences, which left us scratching our head as to which district really belonged in.
I remember a joke not too many years ago when Wayne Owens showed a picture of Wayne and his wife was dead and the line went down between their bits.
Hold that thought right there.
It was a joke.
Yeah, no, you're about to see that. Same thing here. These irregularities were reported to the county clerk, who in turn took it to the lieutenant governor. Over the next 1 to 2 days, multiple counties, and this was about 1/3 of the counties in Utah, had reported the same boundary issues to the lieutenant governor. And 3 days after the boundaries had been released, the lieutenant governor directed all counties statewide to freeze their re-precincting efforts. Legislation was required to correct the several hundred errors that surfaced. So after completing the corrective actions, but due to statutory deadlines, the 29 counties were left with literally less than 24 hours to completely re-precinct their entire jurisdictions. So fast forward several months after everything had been resolved, the Davis County staff, including myself, prepared and shared the following presentation with the Utah Association of Counties at their annual conference. So this is where the presentation began. And bear in mind, this was given to a group of county officials, county clerks and so forth, and election officials. And it was 10 years ago. So this was immediately following the redistricting efforts back then. So this cartoon kind of sets the stage as to the importance of good mapping. This cartoon was by Pat Bagley of the Salt Lake Tribune, sometime, I believe, in the middle of 2011. And it was in response to an annexation that occurred in one of the cities in Utah County. When the annexation occurred, it created a situation with 2 incumbents in the same district. So not only did they get a fiasco out of it, they also got a political cartoon out of it. I'm going to share a brief video. It's about 2 minutes long. And this will show the process by which precincts are created from the redistricted boundaries. And these are the boundaries that we're going to be drawing. So we have state of Utah, Davis County as shown. We'll zoom into Davis County. And you'll see the cities appear mainly for reference. You'll see the congressional boundaries come in now. So there were 2 congressional districts that covered Davis County. Also the Senate districts as shown. House districts. And there were 2 school board districts that covered Davis County. What we do now is we take these 4 sets of boundaries and we stack them on top of each other. Congressional, Senate in blue, House boundaries, and the school board boundaries also coming in now. And these boundaries, they create a series of polygons, as we call them. And we refer to the boundaries as hard boundaries. The precincts are drawn within these hard boundaries. And a precinct cannot cross a hard boundary for any reason. We remove the hard boundaries. And we're left with a series of a little over 200 voting precincts in Davis County. So that's how our voting precincts get formed. But they are based on the redistricting data and the lines that we will be drawing. So does that make sense to everyone? Any questions there? There were a number of challenges that we faced back at that time. The biggest challenge was dealing with the census block boundaries.
And what are census block boundaries?
They are the smallest
Unit the census gives us?
smallest geographic area that census
Okay.
provides us, yes. The time frame that was involved was also problematic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And the need of I should say the desperate need of a review process.
Now, I might note that when you say the time frame for redistricting and re-precincting was a problem then, it's only going to be far worse this time.
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. So we'll take a few minutes on each one of these items here. So we'll start with the census block boundaries. And I'm going to show some very specific examples. This is a neighborhood in Kaysville. The yellow lines represent the parcel boundaries. The black lines represent the census block boundaries. The congressional boundary or boundary between districts 1 and 2 went right through here. And you'll notice that it followed the census block boundaries. But take note of what it did to this house here. Also, we cut a corner off of this property and similar on this property. That's the way the census block boundaries were drawn. And the congressional boundary simply followed the census block boundaries. We had to do some cleanup work on that to clarify which house was in which district, which was later approved by the legislature. When we redrew it, it appeared as follows. I think it's interesting to note that we have next door neighbors.
Yeah.
That are in different congressional districts.
To some extent, no matter how we end up drawing the line, we're going to end up with
That'll happen.
cases like that. But we've got the people on opposite sides of the street next door, and we want to try and minimize that, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we're going to be faced with some issues and probably lots of them, I would guess, and we're going to have to work through them. But what we don't want to do is draw it right through the middle as you mentioned, right through a bedroom or a living room or whatever.
If I understand the law correctly, when we do reapportionment for congressional districts, population is a driving factor,
Yes,
and for the legislative districts, we can have deviation of 10%, 5 above, 5 below. So if a house district is say 50,000 people, you can have 47.5 or 52. And so when you start on those lines, yeah, it take your time. But when we had up in Cache Valley, Nibley was cut in half by this district. So Pete Knudsen and I got together and we adjusted the boundary. So he had all of Nibley and I had some of his. Got all through, our county clerk called me, he says, now Lyle, what do we do with the 3 homes that live between Nibley boundary and Millville?
Yes. And
Karen Hale.
we're gonna
Well,
come
that's-
across issues.
Now,
like
that's the issue we come to.
So we're gonna see lots of that. Okay, continuing, this was a congressional boundary I just showed you. Now I want to show you a Senate boundary. This is the base housing up at Hill Air Force Base. The black lines represent, again, the census block lines. When the Senate line was drawn, you can see it follows a pretty squirrely, almost meaningless path through there. But again, you'll see that it followed the census block boundaries. Another item to note is that typically a military base like this would constitute, I think, quite easily a community of interest. So we see here that this community was just chopped right down the middle into 2 separate Senate districts.
The 2 straight lines there, what are those?
I have no idea.
Okay.
We just say it was done by the census and sometimes it makes no rhyme or reason.
The census block lines are problematic.
Yes,
There's no way you can actually subdivide those.
right.
That's the minimum of frontage. How does the census though, when the census line splits a house, how does the Census Bureau then apportion the population to which side of the line?
I don't have the answer to which side, but the population of a house should be on one side or the other.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that the Census Bureau themselves don't have a policy of making that decision before they actually give what the census data is of that block, because somebody's got to decide
Yeah.
that. So I'm assuming that the Census Bureau makes that kind of decision already.
Many of these blocks and census tracts were created years and years and years ago. And
Before there were houses there.
That's the point. Many times there were not houses there. And when the census came to the state here, probably 3 years ago to kick off the count process, we asked very specifically, what does it take to get these blocks and these lines cleaned up so they make more sense? And I kid you not, but it almost takes an act of Congress to get them to change it. It's a very, very high standard. Once they lay down these block boundaries, they're pretty much in concrete. So let me continue here. So
Now, is there a way of us finding out the answer to that? How
Yes.
the
Yes.
Census Bureau determines where the person fits on either side of the line that divides a house in there?
And I actually, one of the things I'm starting to take some notes on are what are additional things that we would like to learn about in future meetings, and this is one of those that I've got on my notes. So.
Can I ask just one quick question? Do you have a legal requirement to have your precincts equal size?
equal size, no.
Okay.
The standard for precincts is it can be anywhere from 0 registered voters. This is not population, it's registered voters when precincts are created.
Okay.
Up to 1,250 is the max.
See, that raises a question in my mind. We talk about population being equal. I know that one part up in Logan where we have a lot of refugees that are there, who are really not registered voters. They certainly are counted for census for assistance and help. But do we factor that in? Do we look only at registered voters? And if we do, what about students who live at Utah State or at BYU who don't register to vote there, but they're there? Or we have a number of kids in high school and grade school, and they can't vote. Do we keep them in our count? Do we make sure registered voters are all equal?
No, I can't.
I think it's on population.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Okay, the boundaries that we're going to be drawing are based on population.
only
This is a county effort here. to do the re-precincting. And at the county level, it's done by number of registered voters, not population. Okay, let me continue here.
So that's a substrat of what we're gonna do.
It's impacted by what we do, but it's not directly what
We will.
We're
do
gonna
the work
complicate
here.
your lives by what we do.
They will attack this commission, or whoever's maps get adopted will get attacked if they're not done properly by the counties, I should say. So we did some cleanup work on this boundary here, and we had it redrawn as shown, so it clarified primarily the difference between these two houses up here. Now I'll show you an example of a house boundary. What we're looking at up here in the top of the image is Centerville, and at the bottom of the image is Bountiful. And you'll see the city boundary there as shown. The house boundary was drawn through this area, as you see it there. They do not match. So the question comes up, why? Because they followed the census block boundaries.
And so I'm already seeing that our ability to do things is still gonna be limited by the census blocks.
No, we have an
Well,
out.
Yes. and no.
We have an out, yes, we do, and it's called follow the geographic features.
Okay.
And as I go through here, you'll see how we got things processed and cleaned up. So this boundary was also modified, and we simply made the house boundary match exactly to the city boundaries. This is in East Layton. Highway 89 over here. And the orange line that you're looking at is a school board boundary. When we brought in the house boundary that had also been drawn, you'll see that it created a strip along Highway 89. And also this small subdivision right here. Now, if the boundaries had remained as you see them now, they would have legally become two precincts. This being a precinct and a strip down the middle of 89, literally and legally so. There was a lot of
because
that.
again, precincts can have 0 voters.
Yes, they can. Not encouraged, but it can happen. So one of the big issues with this neighborhood right here, there's probably 20 houses in here. And if that had become a precinct, and you figure there's maybe 20 voters in there also. And being in East Layton, which is heavily Republican, you figure all of them are going to vote Republican in 20 houses. Then we have issues of voter privacy being raised. If all of them were to vote Republican, and then a very small precinct such as this, it could be easy for voters to all vote the same.
For voters to check up on their neighbors. If you have a precinct of 20,
Yes,
you want to look at the vote, and if there's one outlier, they can figure out who it is.
Or
Probably
other
pretty easy.
observers collecting the data.
yes, okay. So again, we made corrections. We moved this boundary eastward to match the house boundary, and again, this boundary eastward to match the house boundary, and this is the final boundary here, and this is how it is today. You care to pronounce that, Commissioner Bishop? Gerrymander.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a slide here and see if you can find the problem with this house boundary that was drawn back then.
No. Yes. Not hard to spot.
Okay, this is also in Layton. It's about a half-mile east of the Layton Hills Mall. So the question comes up, why was it drawn that way? Any guesses?
Somebody lives in that house.
Census
block-
tracts.
Census block boundaries. That's the way the blocks were drawn. And so I'm not sure who drew the house boundary through there, but they simply, again, followed the census block boundaries. So we, again, did a little cleanup, but unfortunately we could not, we expected to have the line come out and down like this, but That's the way the blocks are drawn. That's where the population was counted for that block. So
So if we adjust away from the census blocks, how do we account for that population?
we'll just have to take it on a case by case basis.
Can I ask you? Legislature first, and then you went back and readjusted it?
No,
You did it before the final approval?
yes and no. We made the recommendations for the cleanup work and then the legislature approved what you see here now.
All right, well, that makes sense then.
But when population starts driving it, if you take like that little area out and put it in another district, you then deprive the district.
Yes.
So you can't just do one. You have to do how they impact all the others.
So as we come across these little squirrely areas here, we're gonna have to look at the count of the block and determine which side of the line it belongs on. And apply the population, the numbers to the correct side of the line. We're
And
gonna see a
how
lot of
much
this.
that will skew the population.
Yeah,
So if we do a handful, that's one thing, but if we do a lot, it could skew the population.
it potentially could, yes.
One household,
Right,
take 25 houses,
might.
got problems.
So the boundary we're looking at right now is what's still on the records today. This house is. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay, we'll switch gears here and look at the time impact. And I'm gonna speed up through some of this. So we put together a timeline. Most of this covers the legislative efforts of redistricting. So the census data was released back here and actually it was released on February 24th, which is 5 weeks early. And then a couple months later, public hearings were held and the legislative committee actually carried out the line drawing on maps. This says special session. I think it was actually an interim session.
So the public hearings were held before the redistricting lines were proposed.
Yes,
So it's just to get general ideas of communities of interest and
exactly.
those kinds of things.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And there was no problem with this timeline and the sequence of events here. On October 31st, the data was handed over to the counties. And you'll see the green, if you look down here, productive precincting work. You notice it tapers off down to nothing. To be accurate about this sloping line should have gone almost straight down. We had about 3 days of productive precincting work. And the next 3 months should have been the county's time to carry out the re-precincting. By the way, the deadline for the precinct submission back to the state is January 31. So back here to the red area, that represents time that was gobbled up by what we called the cleanup work, which consisted of bill preparation by the counties and the state.
How hard and fast is that January 31 date? I understand this is 10 years ago, but for us, is there a possibility of pushing that back to give counties a little more time in the precincting work, or is there something magic about January 31?
That still stands as I understand it, but that's a very good point. And I know we had one date adjustment already, but I wouldn't mind floating the idea of having another date adjustment if it's possible. So, but we can come back to that.
The concern on that is the date when people get to file and start collecting signatures.
Yes,
So that's the problem date we have to fit.
so that's a consideration, but if we took several deadlines that are involved here, that could be one.
But the signatures don't actually, the signature problem doesn't actually depend on where the precinct line is, does it though?
Yes, it does. The precincts have to be created before signature gathering can begin.
Okay.
So you can see this period of about 3 months here should have been given to the counties. Instead, it was all taken up by preparing 3 different bills to clean up. I showed you 5 examples moments ago. Well, let me back up here. So looking towards the end of January, The legislative session began on January 23rd, the day that the three cleanup bills, as we called them, were passed was January 30th. But the deadline for the counties turn in the precincts is the very next day. So that's the pickle that the county got put into.
I have a feeling counties aren't gonna like us very much this time around either.
Name is patient.
So what was the cleanup legislation? And I'll just kind of briefly go through this. Senate Bill 125, House Bill 286 and 287. In total, I showed you 5 examples. Statewide, there were 411 of these various corrections that were written into these 3 bills.
I should add this, computers have helped it a lot. But you can't just walk into staff and say draft the bill and have it done in an hour. They're very complicated drafting things.
Especially something like this.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you see it took a couple of months here to prepare those bills. It was very detailed, very meticulous.
Of course, the only line that was really significant was the congressional line that went through Kaysville. I really didn't care about your other stuff at all.
Okay. A beautiful line. Okay, the issues that we encountered, the census block lines were never designed for local use. They were designed for federal use. The timeframe through the counties under the bus. The timeframe would have been fine had we not had to do the cleanup legislation. Concurrent redistricting, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. It reduced the awareness of activity among this isn't totally clear, among the let me get my words right. Among the legislative committee that did the redistricting. Now, we're not blaming anybody. No one saw this coming, and we're not faulting anyone. Our focus back then was on the future, which is today. That's us right now. Proposed solutions. Use permanent local geographic features as district boundaries. Where have we seen that before?
So
Yeah.
local geographic, what are you about, like city limits or those? Okay,
And
Here it is,
rivers
right
and-
here.
rivers and
Okay.
We have
Order
so
of
many
importance.
rivers in Utah.
Okay, county boundaries, city boundaries, road center lines, rail center lines, rivers, ridge lines, etc. Parcel lines,
What are parcel? Oh, parcel of
Property
land.
lines.
Yeah, okay.
parcel lines, I highly discourage use of
Oh,
property lines
yeah.
because properties get split and divided on a regular basis.
Well, and if you could just convince developers not to build curved streets too. it would help.
That might help. The parcel lines are not just bottom of the barrel for redistricting, they are under the barrel. We do not want to use parcel lines if at all possible. So this was the first recommendation that was made back then.
makes sense.
Okay, no one lives on the boundaries, they're ideal. Written descriptions. I won't cover this too much, but it would say, for example, a bound follows this boundary to the next boundary and then along another boundary. It includes a combination of a city, this example does, a road and a county boundary. Written description. I'm not certain if we're required to have written descriptions or not, but that's something we should probably clarify. Written descriptions are very detailed and very intense, and they will be, if we have to do them, they are a time consumer. Third recommendation, to establish timeframes, and this is probably largely irrelevant given what we've had regarding our timeframe today. So this is April 1, 2021, which was a few weeks ago, when we anticipated the release of the census data up to the end of this year. And so we're looking at establishing timeframes within these 9 months. to carry out different stages of redistricting. So we'd first have the public hearings, then carry out our line drawing, send it to the legislature. And after that is approved, then it goes to the counties for re-precincting.
We've already lost 2
Yeah,
to 3
this
weeks.
is still possibly follow, but we'll have to play it out as we move forward. We also proposed extending it to a 10-month process, but that was before the signature gathering efforts were in play. Conduct redistricting in a sequential manner. Here's the same timeline, and I believe this would be huge for us and for the public. We start with the congressional boundaries first. We draw those. Then, after those are done, not in concrete, but when the drafts are done, then we move to the Senate boundaries. Then we move to the House boundaries. Then we move to the school board boundaries. And after that, a review process. So that's something I think that would be very helpful for our commission here today, is to do it sequentially rather than congressional, Senate, House, school board all being done at the same time.
Just remind me, isn't this commission supposed to present 3 proposals for each one of those?
Yes,
Yes.
So not only would you do 1, we have to do 3, and
we have to turn in 12 maps.
we got Karen on our committee.
Oh, boy.
She's a writer.
Fifth recommendation. Fifth recommendation was to establish a review committee that relied pretty heavily on GIS data, or GIS processing, I should say. And the purpose would be to make sure that those lines, the
Do-
examples that we looked at earlier, would be identical
I'm sorry.
where intended. Go ahead.
Do we have the legal authority amongst ourselves to establish such a review committee for our work?
We're going to be hiring GIS staff, and so I
So
think that
that's,
largely,
they'll perform that function.
Yeah, I think that is within our purview.
Good.
yeah, so I think that will largely meet this recommendation here.
At least for the GIS people, the
Yes,
elections official.
that
beyond
may
the-
be outside of our.
Yeah. But these were the recommendations made back then before, this is long before we had an independent commission ourselves here. Okay, so this effectively says, let's just use GIS more in the process, please.
So they'd be reviewing the congressional boundaries as we're working on the Senate ones.
I'd say that would be a good idea, yes. I
Rather
hadn't
than
looked at it
waiting,
that way.
rather than waiting for us to get done with 12, then have them
Yeah.
review.
Yes,
Although they're gonna have to do it at the end to ensure complementarity.
yes, yeah.
Seemed to me the review committee should have county clerks, even local people. Like I said, I've never been on the committee, but every time the drafting committees come back with a proposal, that I've sat down and looked at it, I said, you realize you missed this area or that area and haven't put it in. I understood the grant. For example, little town of Paradise, which is the south end of Cache Valley, was never put in a senatorial district. It was excluded.
That's legal.
I saw that when they did the district, and the next time I thought, what?
Sounds like a pretty fundamental flaw.
That's right.
That's actually something I have thought of. It's not part of this presentation, but possibly send draft lines to the county clerks and give them a few days to review. Ask, are there any new subdivisions being built here? Is there any realignment of roadways? Ask questions like that. It might be worthwhile to do that, send it to the counties and let them
Yeah.
throw feedback to us.
Well, that was another question I had as you were reviewing, is that the extent of on the ground shifting of
Mhm.
population constantly. That's, I mean, there's only so much we can do. Can't do anything about the census. That's
That's
retrospective.
behind us, yes.
You know, these recommendations are really helpful. Would it be possible to, are they in a report somewhere? Because they're very educational for me if we could get
Okay.
a copy of it.
Sort of like a check sheet that we can use as we go
Yeah,
along.
yeah.
Yeah, I
There's
can
some
work
really
with Jeff
good.
to make sure we can get those distributed.
I'm gonna-
This is the deal, you talk about Utah County, I understand when they drew the reapportionment lines, there was a vacant area, they put it in one district because nobody was there.
Right.
Then they built homes there,
Right.
and the legislator moved into that area unbeknownst that when they did the
They
redistricting,
did,
that
yeah.
land was, so he ends up now in the, and so, and under Utah Constitution, to be a legislator, you have to live in your district. So if you move, you lose. Contrary to the congressional, they can live where they want in the state of Utah, they don't have to live in the district.
Right.
So these lines become really important as things change.
They do. Yeah.
I think it's also good for us to realize that when we talk about population, we have to use the census numbers for
Yes.
data. Even though we all know the census data is inaccurate even today. It was done a year ago. All the people who have died from COVID, they're still counted if they died after April 1st. And if somebody moves into an area, it doesn't matter. And you already mentioned the difference between a registered voter and the number of voters is going to be significant. So an area that has lots of kids, that's going to have an impact politically, but not for what we have to do. Same thing with Hill Air Force Base. Most of those people don't vote in Utah anyway. So there's a whole lot of numbers you throw in there to give a population center, but you realize for political purposes, most of those people are voting elsewhere where they registered when they entered the military. So you get very few votes, but it still counts as a lot of people. And the numbers are wrong. Even today, the numbers are wrong. We just have to look at that.
I think the senatorial district in Utah County that includes the BYU housing, on paper, it looks like it's the same equal number. When the votes are actually counted, that senator gets far less votes than anybody else because most of the students at BYU housing don't vote.
Or they go back home.
Now they go back home. I should say that.
We took a look at several other states and how they carried out their sequence of events in re-precincting, and redistricting. So, and we came across Arkansas and we found that to be kind of interesting. So I'll just briefly go over this. If you look at the dates on the timeline, you'll see Utah did the Congressional, Senate, House, and School Board through the end of August and through September of 2011. Arkansas carried theirs out almost as soon as the census had released their data. Within weeks, they took care of their congressional boundaries first. And then subsequent to that, they drew their Senate and House boundaries.
How did they do that? Did they just make up some of the data they needed?
I don't know, but they were done before we even started. So it's just kind of a fun example here of how the different states carry out their redistricting.
I mean, that does suggest that they relied primarily on population census data, period.
Right.
Yeah, that they didn't get public input and all of those kinds of things, which we are, for a whole host of reasons, are tasked to do.
That was the question that quickly came up in our minds. How did they get public input in that short amount of time? But that's their issue.
Yep.
The other considerations is probably won't affect us too much. Increase, again, this is geared towards county operations. Use more GIS, use the same GIS data during different committee meetings. And we saw a few red flags that perhaps one set of roads, GIS roads, had been used. For example, in drawing the congressional boundaries, and we suspected maybe a different set of roads had been used for the Senate. And so we never confirmed that, but it was a suspicion based on things we saw. So making sure that we use the same data, and that's what I mentioned to you. That was not long ago.
So, and if I remember correctly, the folks that we talked with at the state, they have now a comprehensive data set that we'll be able to use for
They do.
road boundaries and lines, et cetera.
Yes, it's very comprehensive, very solid, and it comes from the counties. So the counties are providing their local data. These were recommendations that we were hoping UAC would push to the legislature. So we were trying to get them to strike while the iron is hot. Okay, so these really don't affect us here. And the recommended legislation that we tried to get them to pick up and run with didn't work, but we tried. Use permanent boundaries, which we now have in Prop 4, written descriptions, timeframes, and I'm hoping we can adopt that here. Expanded 10 months, that doesn't apply to us today. Conduct redistricting in a sequential manner, as I just mentioned. And the review committee, which is largely swallowed up now by having a GIS team. Anticipated results. No more zero and low population precincts. The public would see a more orderly redistricting process. There would be no need for cleanup legislation. And if there's any errors in the boundaries that are drawn either by us or the legislative committee, if there's errors, it has to go back to the entire legislature. So let's eliminate the need for such cleanup legislation. Counties would have time to do their re-precincting. Choices that were.
But besides just the oxymoron nature of zero and low population precincts, is there another downside to that? I mean, does the county have to service them with a voting booth or something else, or?
Davis County currently has 4 precincts with 0 voters in them. 2 of them cover the Great Salt Lake. No one lives in. And the other 2 are very small areas that we did recommend be cleaned up, but they were not included in the cleanup legislation. So one of them is the off-ramp near the Cherry Hill amusement area. It's literally just the off-ramp. And the other one is probably half a mile to the east of that, up on the hillside where a congressional boundary went this way and the house boundary went that way. And it covered an area maybe the size of this building. So the choice is be proactive and clean it up or do things right the first time, or we're gonna have to do some more cleanup.
You know, this is outside of our purview. But if we actually had legislation that stacked districts.
Yeah.
So change the legislature to a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 members in the House for 1 senator. You had to do the Senate districts, then you had to create 3 legislative districts within the Senate boundaries. Not only would it make campaigning easier, but it would help with this problem at the same time.
That's what Idaho
It
does.
would make it easier for the voters to keep track of who their representatives are.
For 2 years.
But that's not one of our options.
Yeah, that's not, unfortunately, not one of our options. Although I think it,
Well, the Constitution says we can have up to 3 times as many House members as senators, but the Senate number's frozen at 29 and have to have at least 2. So it was 769 at one time, then it got to 75. We did that with the school districts one time. We had 3 congressional districts. We divided them into 5 school districts, so they had 15. Yeah, it's pretty hard with 4.
Okay, our final slide was when we tried to get UAC to pick up the issue and run with it. They considered it, ultimately never did. That's okay, because Prop 4 came into being. So this is the end of the presentation here.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's
I-
very helpful.
I'm a little more daunted about what we have to do.
Yeah. That's what education will do for you.
Yeah, come on.
Complicate
This is
things.
just gonna bing, and well, oh, no, bing, this is the right one. The dumb legislature, honey, we're gonna be delighted to do it.
we're gonna be bored. We won't have anything to do.
That's right.
Thank you, Jeff, very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for entertaining me here.
No, that's a good idea.
So again, thank you, Jeff. We appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, because I think it does highlight some of the challenges that we'll face. But there are also many other challenges that we'll face. And one of the things that I hope is we continue to have these discussions is there are things that we want to learn more about. For example, as we talked about, how is it that the census decides when a house is split where to allocate the population? I'm trying to document those so that we can get answers to those, help us as we sort through these issues. So one of the things that I wanted to spend at least a few minutes on today, I don't know that we necessarily need to finalize it yet. Please, Jeff.
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
Okay, I was given the permission to share this presentation with you. The presentation does belong to Davis County, so if anyone who's listening wanted a copy of it, they would need to approach Davis County and request it via our grandma request. So I'm sorry I left that out at the beginning. I should have mentioned it then. So sorry to interrupt that, but
No.
that's what the county requested.
Sure. Thank you. So again, if anybody wants a copy of the presentation, they can submit a grandma request to Davis County to obtain that. So I wanted us to talk a little bit about what we see as our mission and objectives. Because on the face of it, it seems our mission is fairly easy, right? Well, to use your words, we've got to draw some congressional boundaries. We've got to draw some state Senate boundaries, some state House boundaries, state school board boundaries, and that seems like what we have to do. But at the same time, I think in some ways we're trying to accomplish something more significant, right? We're trying to do this in a way that's transparent, that's engaging, and that people feel is legitimate. And so I just wanted to get a sense from your perspective, what you think, how you would define success of this commission.
Very subjective.
Okay, it's a hard thing to do, sure. Karen?
I think if the public feels that there was a sincere effort to provide a public process for redistricting, and so, some may view that it, some may think that it, I don't know, I guess it didn't provide all of the things that they wanted it to, for the district or the commission to deliver everything to meet their expectations, but at least if there was a real attempt to make this process as transparent, as inclusive as possible. And I really, you see the support of Prop 4 that, we know the public feels strongly about this. And so if we can deliver at that end, I think, that just some people may not deem it as fully inclusive or whatever, but if we make that sincere attempt to be as inclusive as possible, and as we go out to present to different areas throughout the state too, just with that goal in mind, I think that is, for me, I guess a goal that we should share with the commission.
Thank you. I did want to apologize. I called you Karen instead of Commissioner Hale. So,
well, I wasn't defending, so thank you.
no, I do want to make sure that I'm respecting each of you in your either current roles or previous roles that you've served in, and don't want to be too informal in the process.
I'll add this to what Commissioner Hale just said. I think it's going to be an impossible task because I think everybody's going to, it's like doing a public education bill, education committee. Everybody in the audience looks up and says, how does it impact my school district? One time I represented 5 school districts. And so every time a vote came out, I had to, how do I not have North Summit hate me and Cash like me or whatever? Because everybody's going to look at this map and look at their place and how they're impacted without any realization that if we just do one in the home, we could probably do a pretty good job. But you have to fit it in. Especially in House districts and Senate districts. So I don't know if there is maybe the definition that if only 98% of the people hate us, maybe we've done it. Because I just think we have to do, I agree with what Commissioner Hale said, but we need to be open, we need to make discussion, but the time frame catches us. And it's not like you could stand on the floor of the Senate and say, we want 40,000 or 50,000 people in this House district in Bountiful. And we want 50,000 people out of Centerville, and we want 50,000 out of Lake. You know, because what does that mean? And that's really becomes a difficulty, I think, as a lawyer in the legislature. I understand words mean something. And you just can't just say, well, they'll know what it means. They don't. You have to spell it out. So I think that's going to be really, really a challenge. And I think getting attorney involved about this, and we may decide we're doing something and suddenly federal court in Pennsylvania decides something else in California. And you're just, I mean, I just think we have to get our timeline, do the best we can going on that. But I can tell you, everybody's going to look at it, just like the public edge budget. How does it impact my district? If my district wins, then I like it. If my district doesn't, for any reason, I don't.
Well, thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I agree completely with what Commissioner Hilliard has said about the vulnerability of the results and the fact that you can't please everyone. But I have just a slightly different take on our mission as a commission. This is the first independent commission on redistricting in the history of the state of Utah, and the people made it very clear, as Commissioner Hale has pointed out, that they wanted that. In fact, they wanted it, you know, even more than they ended up getting. And so to some degree, I have some faith in the notion that if we deliver a rational, nonpartisan approach to elective redistricting, that we will get some credit for that. It may not tip the scales one way or another on particular decisions about boundaries, but I think our mission to some extent is to increase the faith of Utahns that this really thorny subject can be approached by people of goodwill who don't have dogs in the fight in terms of the results. And that's us on the commission, not necessarily the people in the county, you know, the citizens in different counties and so on. So I think that the independence of this commission is key, and that, as Commissioner Hale said, openness to public participation and input is going to be a really important way in which we demonstrate that.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, look. Everything that's been said
I knew
so
you wanted
far-
to say something.
No, everything that's been said so far is true and accurate. We need to do that as much as possible. Realizing that it doesn't matter what we do, people will not understand it.
I agree.
For example, there was an article in the Tribune of two people that did an op-ed congratulating us. And they gave examples of how they have done poor redistricting in the past. And they said, for example, the Moab is divided into 2 congressional districts running down Main Street. That has never happened. Grand County has never been there. They also said Holiday is now divided into 3 congressional districts. Once again, that's totally inaccurate. You can't get Holiday close to the 2nd or 1st district. And these were reputable people that were saying, this is a great idea. So you are going to get complaints about what we do, regardless of what we do. I think it's important because you want to have, you know, some rational reason for why we did that. But we have to establish one of the things that you did in your presentation of coming up with some criteria. When you did the listing of boundaries from county down through geographical, down to parcels, which you said should never be done, I think we need to have some of those same concepts of what we need to do. Because there's going to be conflicts. What is the most important process? And so we've got, is it going to be compactness, or is it going to be population? Or is it going to be continuity so that you can get to a district without having to leave the district? Or is it going to be that nefarious thing called community of interest that no one can ever define and no one knows what it is? Or are we going to just try and hit as close to political boundaries as is possible? So I think we need some priorities as to what is in, how we rank those things. Now, if we were the legislature to avoid being sued, you do very few of those. I'm under the assumption that nobody is really going to sue an advisory committee on our maps. So that maybe if we were a little bit more specific as to what our priorities are, as we make those decisions when we come to a conflict, it would be a whole lot easier. I mean, if we thought we would be litigated, then we should say population is the only thing that's important and everything else you forget about. But I think we need to be a little bit more specific than that, because we're going to come down to a conflict whether, you know, this is where the numbers are, this is where the boundary is, this is where the political boundary is, which is more important. So the first district I represented, they claimed the avenues were split between two districts, and the line went in a crazy way, and it did. They were split, but the numbers were for political equity. So the difference in population between the first, second, third district was 1. I had one more person than the other two did under that matrix. But so that was the criteria. Population was more important than having a straight line going down South Temple and State Street, and so you ran it through the avenues. So we have to, I think, establish for ourselves the priorities of, before we ever start looking at lines, what really is the most important principle as we go through it, realizing that I think nobody who does a comment on it, no one who writes on a comment board will ever like or understand what we do.
And that's why I think a good response to all of these, get on a computer and draw your own map. Just do it so you meet the criteria, because understand from our staff, Utah has never been sued on the reapportionment for congressional because they have gone on the one man, one vote. And so we said, Rob, you had one more than the other 3. And so you can look at it and say, well, I can do different lines. You've got to get that number there. And it's, I'll just give you for Cache County, Box Elder, and Rich. Population of those 3 counties is more than 1 Senate district, but not 2. So what you have to do is you have to divide them up some way. You can go to Rich County, you can go over the mountains into Summit County. And I did that for a while, and I had to go through Wyoming to get into my district, or I had to drive through 4 other senatorial districts to get to it. Or we can go to the Ogden area and put Ogden with Brigham City. And boy, I'll tell you, that's not a good
Culture shock.
Or you can do what
This
we did.
committee will not do that.
Or we can take them to Tooele. Pete Knudsen had to drive through around Salt Lake and drive to Tooele County to have population in it. So you can look at it and you say, what's right? Well, I may say, let's put Rich County, let's put Summit County. You say, no, it really ought to be Weber County. What's right?
Well, I think that the point on, thinking about our priorities, it really gets to
Yeah.
kind of the core issues that we're going to have to face. And I hope that as we start thinking about this, that we do realize that we have a very daunting task. And not that any of you, except perhaps Commissioner Hilliard, is under the impression that we'll have magic fairy dust that will solve all of this for us. But I think the reality is that if we give a good faith effort, as Commissioner Durham said, I hope that does create faith in the populace, that we're doing this not just in an effort to try and somehow subvert the people's will, but that we really are trying to be as engaging as we can and take in as a whole this set of criteria that we've been given in the law, and trying to figure out the best way that we can to balance that.
I think one of the keys to that fairness is to avoid the blatant examples of what the public sees as self-interest. So if we can avoid that and just say, these are tough lines to draw, but the members of the commission have no stake in how it turned out. We're not doing it for our own advantage. We're not doing it for the advantage of a friend. Here's a suggestion. It's like going to be up to the legislature to accept one, but to be able to say, here are 7 people who don't have an interest personally in how those lines are drawn. And they've done the best they can trying to be fair. And you're right, you're not going to please everybody. But if we can avoid the appearance of self-interest, I think that's what a lot of voters are concerned about.
I think one of the biggest priorities that we need to look at is identifying the communities of interest. It is our job to represent our fellow citizens out here. We're not trying to match numbers. We're trying to represent the citizens, our fellow citizens. And I would like to see us focus heavily on identifying these communities of interest. And as Prop 4 calls for, perfect. There might be times when 2 competing communities of interest maybe we have to favor one in the Senate and another in the House to keep them properly aligned. But the bottom line is, if we want the community, or if we want the public to trust us, we have to get their input and show them through the various boundaries that we come up with, that they are inclusive and that their community has been kept together as much as possible.
Thank you. This is probably as good a time as any to shift over to at least have a brief review of the set of criteria that the statute lays out for us. And my thinking is that we probably want to spend a significant amount of time on each of these and probably have some experts that come in to help us think about some of them. Commissioner Bishop noted that the communities of interest can be difficult to grapple with. And if we can have somebody come and help us think through some of those issues and then figure out how we reach out to gather that data. And some of it, I think, goes to Commissioner Hilliard's suggestion that we need people to be drawing maps to show us what they think their community of interest is. So as you think about the set of criteria that we have in the statute, I think it's too early for us to try and identify which one's more important than the other at this stage of the game. But are there some of these criteria that you want to get more information about more quickly than others? I'm hearing Commissioner Baker, for example, say he definitely wants to spend some time on the communities of interest. And so that seems to be one of the things that we ought to have in relatively short order, a more firm conversation on.
And on top of that, I would hope that our attorneys can help us understand what's a legitimate community of interest and what are less salient or defensible decisions about communities of interest.
I would add one other thing to identify them, but also how we measure them. We may identify having community of interest, but how do we measure them? Is it because they're all farmers? Because they all work at fly call? Because they're all living in the avenues? I mean, I don't know.
My thought is that we let them identify themselves, rather than us trying to force it
And
on them.
make their own case.
We hand them a blank map and we say, you draw your community of interest.
The concern about community of interest, as you talk about it, the senator I replaced was very adamant that Cache County should be one senatorial district. It was bigger than the number, but he said, we'll all have a community of interest. If you're going to do a community of interest, Chick would say, you do Cache County as one. And you really can't do that. I mean, a good community interest issue you're going to have is St. George and Cedar City, because they have 2 schools there. They're rivals, they're competing. And what's the community? Because you're going to end up a situation of some tie back and forth, unless you take Cedar City and go east and St. George go north, and They don't cross each other. Then you get the distances involved.
Except they have a total community of interest. Neither of them is Salt Lake.
That's right.
It's a great bond.
Let me add one other thing, because I want to make it sure that I'm not here for any political agenda. None at all. I'm just here. I'm sure I could sit down with Commissioner Hale and we could probably work out something that would not be offensive to anybody, because I respect her and I think she respects me in doing this. But when you say this is a driving thing in the state of Utah, my senatorial district, it lost the sound. And I think when you look at the voting, you're going to see Salt Lake County carried it. But most of the areas outside of Salt Lake County didn't. Now, so that was a strange election because we had the marijuana, we had the other issues on that ballot, and it was really kind of a different. So I'm not looking at this saying I'm being forced by the state of Utah to do it, because I can say my district said no. They didn't think we should do it. But I'm not looking at it that way. I think we ought to do the best we can and do it. But I don't think we should be under the idea that we've got a big mandate in public that we have to come up with something that's different than what the legislature does. Because we may look at their maps when we're all through and say, yeah, they did their job. We did.
I would like someone to also explain, there is a line in there about keeping the core of the existing districts exact. I'd like
Keep
someone,
them-
Pre-existing districts.
yeah, keeping their core intact. I would like someone to explain like what that really means and how you accomplish it, especially when the populations are going to shift. And once again, I guess that goes back to what you prioritize, something that's, but I'm not really sure how you actually do that.
Well, one thing I really appreciated in Commissioner Baker's comments was the suggestion that there's scholarship, and there are a lot of people around the country and right here in Utah who spend a lot of time thinking about everything that has been incorporated into this legislation. I really like the suggestion that we explore the extent to which we could go deeper on these issues by bringing some of those people in to talk to us, to tell us what to read, to educate us. Because to be honest, for me, I have my notions from the language about community of interest, but I don't know the origins of that term or who thought it up or why it's come to the surface at this point in time. I need to be educated on that, and I like that idea.
I'd also like some information on how we go from the retail level of having people draw their own maps to then getting that to an idea that we can use. I like the idea of having people self-define, my interest is this, but if we get 2,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 maps, how does that help us? I mean, how do we aggregate those and decide what's different than the
I
other?
think that's Jacob's job.
Okay. So Jacob's gonna have to recruit some help.
Can I draw on the board?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll try to, I'll give you my
Okay.
perspective. So community of interest. Mark this part. So if we had a community of interest here, where a person comes in and says, this is my community of interest. Another person comes in from the same community and he says, we're here. And the third person from the same community comes in and he says, we're here. We're starting to see this area here that is becoming very concrete as to where that community exists. The mapping software can help us identify this. So if we get 500 people coming in doing this, then we will have a very solid idea of where a particular community of interest.
So the software will help us do that?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
That's why I'm encouraging us to be open to the public. Let the public come in and start marking or start drawing their own boundaries. These are their boundaries, not ours.
Okay. Looks like Jacob, you're off the hook.
But let me add something to it too. It was Idaho, but I'm not sure. I know one state did this reapportionment. They were 11% out and the court struck it down. Now, they may have done all community of interest to do this, but ultimately the Supreme Court says one man, one vote. Now, you're not going to get it perfectly, like Utah thought we got it with the numbers. Even then, you'd have to admit you're probably not right because you'd get everybody to try to do it. we say we're gonna do community of interest and have a deviation on the federal level of Congress,
It won't
by
work.
more than 1% or 2%, it's gonna be, I mean, if I were sitting in the legislature and I was the attorney for the legislature, I'd say these are great ideas, but they don't work. The US Supreme Court says one man, one vote, and your deviation is too high. Can't do it.
So we have to be able to overlay them on top
Yeah.
of each other.
State legislature is not as tough. That's 5% deviation one way or the other. That's, I understand the rule they use. But then the question gets to be, I don't know what the school board is. That's now partisan, but I think we need the same kind of rule, 5%. So I agree, we ought to do community of interest, but maybe in a situation that when you try to do a community of interest, your deviation of population is too high. I don't care what the statute says. If the Supreme Court says, no, it's one man, one vote, doesn't matter what we do.
At the end of the day, it seems that the critical criteria is one person, one vote. And that it's after that we try and balance these other issues. But you're right. I mean, we can't
That's
propose.
hard and
There are
fast.
boundaries.
Yeah. Of reference. So I'm hearing a number of things that people would like to hear and have some more discussions about. What are some of the other things that you all would like to make sure that we're getting some input on? And obviously, as we get legal counsel, we'll have more of these that emerge.
I'd like to second Commissioner Bishop's request regarding the core of a prior district. What in the world is it? How do we define that? Is there an existing definition?
Yeah.
Okay.
Preserving cores of prior districts.
That's
Which,
incredibly
which,
vague.
when we have massive shifts in the population, it may become really daunting. So,
Well, that may make it easier too, if you.
If there is no
Yeah.
core.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ham.
Yes, I think too, the listing of following the natural, geographic, and landmark features, I think is incredibly important. If we want to encourage civic participation, we have to make it as easy as possible. And oftentimes, identification of the district is much easier when we have those geographic or man-made boundaries.
Have a good reason to exceed those or to go outside of those. And population may be one of the reasons we have to.
So I know I've had some communication with some scholars that have been doing some of the mathematical and statistical kinds of examinations of these things. And I think it would be nice to get their perspective, in part because the statute encourages us to use current, statistical and mathematical approaches where possible. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we've seen in the myriad of things that we've read is that there's not a single measure necessarily that's going to give us the magic answer that's going to solve all of our problems. They're not going to take our difficult decisions away, but hopefully they can help us identify those difficult issues and allow us to think more carefully about them. So are there other things that come to mind tonight?
Again, I would hope that our attorneys would give us the red flag that things absolutely cannot be considered,
Well, yeah.
if
actually-
there are such.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because in the summary here, and I should have pulled up the statute, but I assume this all comes from statutory language.
Yes.
And apparently we are specifically authorized to adopt our own standard that will prohibit us as a commission from using such things as partisan political data, political party affiliation information, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something I think that needs to be on our discussion agenda to get that policy in place at the outset so that everything we do is seen to be free of those considerations.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm assuming that you're going to give us some training classes on using that software and
Yes.
things that we can play around with and at least ask questions of
Yeah.
ourselves before we come to the meetings.
I'll let you use my 5-year-old granddaughter.
I was gonna say.
Hey, I'll take it.
So yes, yeah, when the software is identified, we will have some tutorials on how to use it. Although I don't expect any of us to become the GIS wizards that Commissioner Baker is. But I do hope that whatever software it is that we have the public using, that it's intuitive enough that we can use it as well. And so as we talk to people, we can encourage them to use it based on our experience as well.
I mean, it'd be nice to be able to, they wouldn't say, okay, if we use city boundaries and we start from that, how far off are districts?
Yeah.
What other kinds of things, or can we avoid cutting the city in 5 parts and maybe only in one small section to balance that population? It'd just be nice to conceptualize it before trying to do it by a committee of 7.
Which direction do you go? You go north to get it, south to get it? You know, I was thinking, and again, one of the difficulties you have is we can't talk about this thing other than the open meeting. So I thought about, there's several approaches we could take. I'll just talk about Congress right now. We could take the current districts we now have, and we could see where the population lies. We could adjust those boundaries wherever we get the population and see if we can bring together more community of interest through that. And that's already been invented. Against the statute, we do that for the Senate, we do it for the House, just kind of look at the districts. Number 2, the big argument they had 10 years ago is, do we do a donut in Salt Lake County, make a district, and have everybody else around, or do we do a pizza and have everybody having Salt Lake people have ties in with the other areas as well? That's an approach. The third approach we could do is we could say there's a base of population in Weber County, one in Davis County, one in Salt Lake County, one in Utah County, and make those the 4 main bases of each of the congressional districts. And then, of course, right here, Salt Lake, so I've seen by Todd Weiler say there's 1.2 million people in Salt Lake County, and you can only have 750,000 in the district. I'm sure if we put Salt Lake County all in one district and said that's a community of interest, that's 1.2 million. That'd take a big thing. So Salt Lake County is not going to be alone. The question is whether to make them alone. And of course, again, Congress, you don't have to live in your district. Jason Chaffetz didn't live in his district. Blake Moore doesn't live in the district. Ben McAdams didn't live in the district. You can run wherever you want to do. Congress or legislature is different. Or the other way, we could say, okay, we'll give Utah County, Salt Lake County, Davis Weber one, and then we'll take one trying to give the rural people some kind of representation so they're not all controlled by those 4 districts. Because if you look at what's the population of these 4 counties, Wasatch County, probably 70 or 80% of the state of Utah.
Yes. Yes.
And so they actually could control, and I can tell you, well, can't guarantee you, but I suspect if I went to Utah legislature and said, I'm going to take this 1.2 million in Salt Lake County, I'm going to put 600,000 in one, 600,000 in the other, and then fill it in, it would never pass. I think the legislators say that would give Salt Lake then probably 2 districts, 2 congressmen to the frustration of everybody else. So there's a political thing that has to go into what we have to do. And what's the figure? There's over 600,000 registered Republicans and less than 200,000 registered Democrats. So when I have a Democrat say, I want a district created for me.
Yeah, but there are a lot of registered voters who aren't necessarily included in those communities. And there's a lot of movement on occasion across party lines. I mean, to look at how many people affiliate with a party.
I don't even want to go in there.
I agree. I don't
but
want
I'm
to go
just
in there
saying
either.
The difficulty is if somebody comes to me. and
Well, that's
say,
what I
want a
think
Democratic
we need to
guaranteed
ensure.
district.
Well, but we're not going to do that.
No, that's not. But people want me to do it.
Well, tell them you can't do that.
Once again, if we have a priority of what's important,
Right.
I think what population has to be number 1. But he is bringing up a different issue when it only hits congressional, because that's long enough, on whether you have urban or rural or combined. And I'm sorry, I have very strong opinions on this, on what it means to have an entire delegation that has both urban and rural working together. We have had illustrations in the past in Utah when we've had basically an urban district in one and urban and rural in the other two. Did not necessarily have the, you don't want to have a position again where one congressman is hung in effigy in the other two districts. That happens. Having urban and rural, well, that's the discussion we have to have.
Yes,
Sure.
I think that is extremely significant. And I think for the sake of Utah's delegation, that has to be one of the things we directly confront and decide whether to do that or not.
well, I agree with that completely because one of the huge divides in Utah, and it's historical and it's current and it's moving into the future, is the urban rural divide. I mean, Utah is one of the most urban states in the nation when you measure by the number of citizens of Utah who live in an urban area. Now that's, talk about a very important for us to figure out how to find compromises, to find ways to include interest across the board without denigrating the fact that a huge majority of our people, are in one category and only smaller numbers of people. I mean, you were talking about registered voters or registered partisan voters, but where people live and the way they live is also very disproportionate in Utah. It has to be figured into the mix.
That will come through on the legislative angles because the districts are so small, you're going to have rural districts and urban districts.
Sure.
You can't do it. Congressional is different.
Yeah.
Because whether you do it or not depends on what happens in Washington and how the state is represented.
Well,
And especially when you have so much of the land that is controlled by the federal government. And let's face it, Salt Lake County is the smallest county as far as public land is considered. So it's not necessarily an issue that's there. But when you come back to Washington and have a delegation that has to work together, that becomes a significant issue. That's why it has to be one of those things we
Yeah.
discuss.
although,
And I've
I'm
seen
sorry.
states that have urban representatives and rural representatives, and they are massively fighting each other all the time. We only have 4 congressional representatives. We can't afford that.
No, we can't afford that. But I would also suggest that it's not purely, I think it's a legislative issue as well, not just a congressional one. Because I see instances of the legislature taking positions or pushing initiatives that, make distinctions between the different communities in our population in ways that do create pushback and hostility. So, I don't think that our legislature is and that the redistricting with respect to the legislature is unimportant in the work we're going to be doing.
Thank you. These are going to be challenging conversations that we have, and I appreciate that folks' willingness to be honest and to share their thoughts, but also at the same time to be respectful as we talk to one another. I really appreciate the efforts that you all have made in doing this. So thank you. That concludes our agenda as I have it. Commissioner Thorne?
What about scheduling? I know you sent something out. Is that the schedule we're going to follow, or is that, I think it was Commissioner Hilliard had some problems with several of those dates.
Yeah. So I've heard back from about half of you on those proposed dates. I would appreciate hearing back from the rest before we completely answer that. I think we can say that our next meeting will be in 2 weeks. That one I think we can definitely agree on. And then as I hear back from the rest of you, I will then send out the proposed date so that we can try and get those finalized. Because I know some of you have travel plans and other important things that you want to make sure that you can juggle with this responsibility as well.
I would suggest also that we get our agenda on travel. If Moab or St. George or Vernal or Salt Lake, 2 or 3 places, or Beaver, Davis, Cache, whatever we're gonna do, the quicker we get that on our agenda so that people know that we're gonna be there, the better off we're gonna be, because we need to get as much publicity out there as possible.
Yeah, we need to get as much publicity, figure out the logistics, and having some staff to help us with that will be critically important. But I think you're right. The sooner we can start signaling when we're going to be out and where we're going to be it will be a critical service to the citizens as they want to engage with us. So I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you. Other issues that we need to cover?
Would you just ask the group, and you don't have to do it right now?
Sure.
Is 6 o'clock the right starting time?
The traffic
5
is-
o'clock, if 5 o'clock would be, I'll show you mine. I'm old. I don't drive well at night anymore.
Yeah.
Starting earlier would be nice, but if it's difficult for those who actually work for a living, which I
Starting
don't do anymore.
Starting earlier would be fine with me.
Okay.
Ask that.
Okay, I will send that that question out.
That's fine with me, because my twins tennis things end the Monday before this meeting. And it's so fun.
As long as your priorities are in order there.
If we-
Grandchildren are always first.
9th grade twins who play varsity for Yukon, who are doing pretty well, get seniors. I'm pretty impressed with
That's-
that.
That's really fun.
So the only other thing that I have is following this meeting, there are some individual forms that we need to be collecting. Just want to,
To whom do we give them?
you get to give them to me and I get to look at your identification.
Oh.
Did I give you mine?
I have not seen the updated one yet.
I've
so-
got my identification, but I've got to fill it out.
So, can I have a motion to close the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
And I guess, technically, we don't have to have a second when there's a motion to adjourn, I understand, but we have a second nonetheless. And so the meeting is adjourned.